Hello and welcome to the CX Files podcast for Thursday, 23rd of February, 2023. My name is Mark Hillary and I'm in Sao Paulo, Brazil.
And I'm Peter Ryan in Montreal. You know, Mark, I can't believe that we are almost through the first quarter of 2023. It's true, as you get older, time goes a lot faster.
Yeah, it certainly does. It certainly does. And I know that, immediately after we record this, we're going to be having a chat quickly about some upcoming shows. And I think that based on the ones I've got, three guests lined up. I know you've got a few. So yeah, we're well past the quarter mark anyway.
Yeah, we've gone past that uncomfortable moment where somebody wishes the other one Happy New Year. It always goes back to that Seinfeld episode where Elaine complains to Jerry, "Can you believe it's the end of February and I got a Happy New Year today?" Hasn't happened to me yet, but we are well into 2023 and so far the year is just rocking and rolling.
Yeah, absolutely. Although one of my neighbors here still has a Christmas tree in their front garden.
Well, they're just getting ready for Christmas 2023. That's all you can say.
Yeah, well, obviously. So why don't you describe our guests this week? Because I know you did the interview, and it's Marianne Rutz, who's an old friend of the pod. I don't think we've had her on by herself, but she's been on some of the panel shows before.
Yeah, good call on that, Mark. She has been on the pod a few times, taking part in a panel, but this is the first time Marianne joined the podcast as a singular guest. And as you would expect, she was outstanding. Marianne comes to the table with some amazing views, some incredible experience, and as our listeners know, has her own podcast called The Operational Excellence Show, which I strongly recommend everyone to download and to listen to, especially the episode where you got interviewed and I got interviewed, which was a lot of fun. Now, she's a very engaging person, and the reason I decided that it would be time to have Marianne on our pod for an interview was the fact that she put out her own show early on in 2023 in the midpoint of January, where she talks a little bit about the breakdown in terms of customer experience. And this is something that I thought was really important because, you know, Mark, we have been catching up with people for the past several months, and we've been talking about how perhaps the travel industry is facing challenges, retail is facing challenges, leisure is facing challenges all around customer experience management. Well, Marianne, on the 26th of January, to be precise, released an episode of the Operational Excellence Show titled, "Where is Your Customer Service Going Wrong?" I was in the airport in Tbilisi in Georgia, and I call what I call dead time, where you're just through security, waiting for the plane. You've not got much to do. You've gone to the gift shop. You've gone to duty free. What are you going to do? Well, I like to listen to podcasts, and I saw Marianne had released one. It was about 15, 20 minutes, but I was transfixed at the message that Marianne brought to the table about examples where people were facing real challenges or had faced real challenges around customer experience and how it impacted their lives. She talked about the pressures that organizations are facing and the poor decisions that many organizations are making for the sake of patching up or band-aiding something that could be the equivalent of open heart surgery in regards to the seriousness about their customer experience operations. It was so good, this podcast. I strongly recommend our listeners download it and give it a listen themselves. I listened to it a second time, like right after I'd listened to it the first time. And I thought to myself, we need to get Marianne on the program to talk a little bit about this. She talks about the hard decisions that executives need to make and are putting off making. She talked a little bit about some of the near to medium term solutions that can be brought to the table. And I don't want to go into too much detail because she brings this much more to life than I ever could. But it really, as far as I was concerned, was a clarion call on her podcast and through the interview about how CX executives and managers need to be thinking in 2023 and going into 2024 as well, because we all know that this labor shortage is not something that's going to go away anytime soon.
Yeah, and I think that quite often, because we're so focused on the sort of 2-minute interaction, and all of the metrics and measurements are just focused on the kind of call or the specific interaction. We never sort of consider the consequences of poor service. And so I think that's really where Marianne's focusing on this, isn't it?
Very much so, very much so. And the reality is, as I mentioned at the outset of our chat today, Marianne comes to the table with an incredible legacy in regards to managing customer experience operations. She knows what she's talking about. And I think one of the frustrations that she has had as somebody who's up close at the coal face of CX is that she's witnessing organizations, regardless of sector, where there's just a reluctance to make any difficult strategic decision for the long term and to make perhaps very uncomfortable decisions or have uncomfortable conversations in the near to medium term about what needs to be done to address some of these challenges.
Yeah, and I think that the conversation we've had, and certainly I saw Paul O'Hara from Teleperformance writing about this recently as well, is customer lifetime value. If you start considering that, you want your customer to be buying products from you and interacting with you for years, and you sort of pull back and focus on that rather than this very specific individual encounter, then you may well behave in a completely different way.
And I think this is important as well, Mark. The whole customer experience over the lifetime counts. Think about what your consumption patterns were when you were in university or just getting out of university and how different they are now. But there's certain brands that you've stuck with. There's certain products and services that you've stuck with because they have been able to, whether blatantly or behind the scenes, find a way of making their products and services relevant to you. But that also takes into account the level of customer experience that you've received. And I think for a lot of people, when they have a brand that they're passionate about and CX falls down, it's almost like a losing somebody or losing a friend because you just feel betrayed. And so many individuals, whether it's looking at people who've been loyal to an airline or a clothing brand or perhaps a particular restaurant chain, have come up with stories like this. And one bad experience can spoil a lifetime of good experiences and loyalty. And this is something that Marianne brings to the table in our chat today. The fact that there's so many brands that just aren't thinking about this and are just thinking about how quickly that they can process somebody through the system, or in certain cases, just not process them and ignore them, but expect them to keep coming back. It doesn't work like that.
Yeah. I mean, that's even worse when you just get ignored. So why don't we go straight to the conversation with Marianne Rutz and yourself?
Sounds good. One of the things that I love about my role as a co-host on the CX Files has been the fact that I've been able to get to know people that host other outstanding customer experience focused podcasts from different parts of the world. And today we're delighted and we're very privileged to welcome, I think, probably one of the best podcasters out there in the form of Marianne Rutz, who joins us from her home in Stirling in beautiful Scotland. Marianne, tell us a little bit before we get into our discussion today about what you're seeing out the window that you described to me before we hit the record button.
Oh, I am seeing the Ochil Hills, so I need to correct you slightly. Remember, we moved to a little cottage slightly outside of Stirling, closer to the Edinburgh area. And I can just see the Ochil Hills, and they are kind of slightly powdered in snow. It's quite pretty. In fact, it's very pretty. And yes, I'm privileged. I can just look out my front room window and I see it. I am extremely privileged, and it reminds me of home.
I was going to say,
see these mountains every day in my happy place, which is Switzerland.
I was going to say, for somebody from Switzerland to be describing the beauty of another location with snow-powdered hills and mountains, that's saying something. So it must be a gorgeous
amazing
view.
It is amazing, and it's I'm really, really privileged where we live. It's in the countryside, and yet if I need the hustle and bustle of a city centre, Edinburgh not too far away, Glasgow not too far away, and it's just, it's very relaxing when I step outside and go for my walk. I'm surrounded by green and beauty in 2-3 minutes of walk.
That's wonderful. That's absolutely wonderful. And you mentioned Glasgow, and we're very excited to be letting everybody know that you're going to be a participant, a speaker at the CX Outsourcers event in Glasgow on May 31st.
I cannot wait for that. It's big time in my diary. Just the speaking is fantastic. Thank you very much for having me. But also the community the palpable feel of these are all colleagues, we work together, we are working it for the greater good, not just for Marianne, for you and for everybody's individual cause, but genuinely for the greater good for our customers and for our contact center colleagues that deliver a lot of first-hand customer experience and are held accountable for that.
Yeah, exactly. And it's going to be a great event. And we're talking about being held accountable for customer service and customer experience. I want to dive into the subject. That's a great segue. So what prompted me, just for the sake of our listeners, what prompted me to get in touch with Marianne for a chat is the fact that I was walking through the airport in Tbilisi in Georgia a couple of weeks ago.
Yes.
And I
call envy
airport
you for that one.
Well, you'll get your chance. I always say airport time is dead time. And I try and fill the dead time up waiting for an airplane by listening to podcasts, listening to something that's going to be stimulating. And I saw that, Marianne, you had published a podcast called Where Is Your Customer Service Going Wrong on the Operational Excellence Show, your outstanding weekly podcast. Now, listen, I have to say that in that concise 16-minute pod, I got more out of that than I have gotten out of so many different podcasts that I listen to when it comes to customer experience management. I want to dive into some of the nuances around this podcast, and I encourage everybody who's listening to the CX Files to go to the show notes. We'll put a link to Marianne's pod. You can listen to it yourself. But Marianne, why don't you start by telling us what prompted you to record this bit of audio gold?
I think the first piece was really, we did a bit of research, what's actually going wrong, what is it? And then I realized that, hey, there is the next deeper level, which we at times just seem to forget about. So I'm using an example in the podcast, and I'm going to bring it up here. So customer complains, a customer ordered a table and 6 chairs. Ordered it in April of last year. We all knew there was a challenge with delivery, etc. We live with that. Customer then got the table after 3 or 4 times trying to complain in this way. My order, and the ordinary kind of request. There are things. Before Christmas, we deliver the table, but we don't deliver the chairs. So what does that do to the customer experience? You have an upset customer. You have an upset family because they were all hoping to sit around the new table. This has a negative impact on maybe the family Christmas that everybody was looking forward to. It has an impact on the grandparents that have maybe sponsored that new table and the 6 chairs. And we just say, oh, it was not delivered, or it was a split order and it wasn't delivered properly, and that was the end of the matter. And that next granular level of who is impacted by the poor service, that one order that should be straightforward, I saw it, I liked it, I ordered a table and 6 chairs, can have. And I think we're missing the trick. We are scratching the surface and we are not considering the wider impact. If we then look at the wider impact, that's where our CEOs, our customer experience experts, the chief operating officer, whoever owns CX, gets the sleepless nights. Because not only does it result typically in a negative trust pilot, it also probably results in loss of revenue, extra cost. A split order is always more expensive than a straight out the door order, and so on. So whilst we are all agreeing that customer experience or the customer service element of things is a bit dodgy at the minute, just tying it back to COVID and say, we can't do any better, isn't washing with the customers anymore.
This is exactly it. And that leads me to my first question, really that I wanted to touch on, Marianne, and it's a very 40,000-foot view question, but I'm going to ask it anyway.
Yeah.
Everywhere we go, and I'll preface it by saying everywhere we go, people seem to have complaints like you've mentioned about the table and chairs. You can take this across sectors, you can take this across countries, across industries. So my question to you as a professional, as somebody who works in the nitty-gritty of CX, is customer service structurally broken in 2023?
I think it has become, people are tired of listening to the complaints, and the level of general acceptance of when it's going wrong is so high that the incentive for the cause or to rectify the cause has kind of eroded. There's no, why should I fix it? It is everywhere. So let's, for example, say you had an experience at an airport, with an airline, and the airline industry is in real trouble predominantly because of staffing. So to say we can't find the staff is one problem. I accept that. But to then accept that we can't find the staff and say nobody can find staff, so therefore we are all in the same boat and we are not doing anything about it, is the wrong attitude. Now, okay, in the UK, that will become a political discussion. I accept that, and this is not a political podcast. But sometimes it really needs for us to call out these uncomfortable conversations that really need to happen in order to fix the problem. Especially when it comes to, let's say, travel. And that's not a conversation people want to have, because they're shying away. And I know I'm generalizing it, and I don't want to step on anyone's toes personally, but in principle, when the conversation becomes uncomfortable, people start to put guardrails and walls up and say, oh no, I'm not going to say this and I cannot say that. And we don't help each other then. And we definitely don't help the end consumer, because we are not lying and saying, no, the problem doesn't exist. But we are not addressing it so that the customer can comfortably walk away and say, yes, this firm is addressing it, or yes, this airline is genuinely solving it.
Yeah. There's a lot to chew on there, and you raised something that I think has been a focal point of many individuals that have been commenting on maybe a bad experience they've received, or maybe trying to diagnose what's wrong with CX right now, and that is the issue about labor and the availability of qualified staff or enthusiastic staff. So from what you're seeing with the clients you're working with, is this something that really does revolve primarily around labor, or are there other factors at play where companies are falling down on CX beyond just the availability of frontline individuals?
Well, it's not just the frontline individual. I can tell you, I'm just working with the client just now, where we identified there is challenges. It's an e-commerce online offering, and there are a lot of people trying to fix things. But what's missing within that firm is the accountability for CX. So everybody does frantically something, a little bit of everything, or a little bit in one angle of the problem, but nobody owns the outcome of, at the end, providing an improved customer journey and subsequently improved customer experience. So for example, customer orders on one marketplace a product. That product is faulty and it comes back. When we then look at our dashboard, we can see that 40 people sent the product back because it was faulty. In that context, customer services writes to the customers, I'm terribly sorry, this product is faulty, we'll replace it for you. Then another person writes to the construction of the product that this product is faulty, do something about that. And then it's finished. So you can see the broken link. until somebody is accountable for that issue or the broken product to be fixed in the production of the product, until such time the same complaint will come in. At some point, we will say, well, it's not being fixed. We're going around the loop. I'm using workforce to write the same story 110 times and over to the customer. We're terribly sorry, we're fixing it. But in fact, nobody's fixing anything, because the accountability, who should fix it and by when, is not there.
You know, there's something interesting that you alluded to earlier in our chat today, and that's the whole issue about consumers and the expectations that consumers have with regards to what they can get for customer experience. And I'll be perfectly honest, we see a lot in Canada signs outside restaurants or bars saying, please be nice, we're short-staffed, please have patience, we don't have the people power that we would have before the pandemic. Yeah. And I think I think the individual consumer is willing to tolerate that up to a point. Yeah. At the same time, their patience has really run out. And they're not willing, as you say, to accept the whole concept of the pandemic as a reason to tolerate bad experiences in a store, in a restaurant, in a bar, at an airline. So my question to you would be, from the perspective of the individuals that are accountable for managing CX, what should they expect in terms of evolving consumer expectations? What are the consumers expecting now in terms of what will constitute a good interaction, as opposed to what it might have been 3.5 years ago?
That is a very interesting question, because I think, in all fairness, I think 3.5 years ago, we have been further along in delivering good customer service and good customer experience than we are today. However, there are some levers that can be pulled. If, you know, we are saying, oh, we don't want customers, we only want to deal with customers now that have a real problem. We don't want to deal with things that can be automated, for example. If automation is behind, what does the customer do? They hang in the queue until such time somebody answers, then they rant and rave, and then they talk about their problem, which creates an even longer wait time on the phone, because the average handling time has gone up. Where there are some simple levers you can pull in your setup, and it's not perfect, it isn't perfect, but it demonstrates you're doing something. So yes, you know, moving service level guidelines into a different sphere is not very popular. But it's also not uncommon that we don't have to have 80-20, we don't have to have 80-60, we can maybe do 60-40, whatever it may be. But we're trying to do something, or offering a service where we call it bureau service. It's frowned upon because the bureau service typically can only deal with very simple queries, but the customer gets answered. He gets a number, a ticket number, he spoke to somebody, he goes away. And that human interaction, even if it's a short one, counts for an awful lot more than what we maybe think it does. We look at it from a cost perspective. But again, a similar story with one of my clients. Back in October of last year, we realized that there was a market in Germany we couldn't really serve due to said staff shortage. So what did we do? We asked German customers, would you be willing to speak English? We did that years ago, back 20 years ago when I first started with Rutz. We did exactly that. It became more and more unpopular because we want to save manpower. So we did that. What happened? The first week was very slow. The second week started to pick up. At the end of the period, we ran it for 4 months. At the end of the period, of the calls that German customers accepted to speak to a English-speaking advisor, over 80% of their queries could be resolved there and then. Now, the impact was that the main contact center didn't get angry customers rolling down the line because a chunk had been taken away. B, we could 80-20 rule, 80% of all our calls are driven by 20% of the issues, typically. So we could isolate them and get them worked. You can argue it's a production line, it's in the wrong language. But what did it do? It also prevented a negative review. And if you know anything about e-commerce marketplaces, when you get a negative review, within no time you're using your Best Buy, your Buy Box, whatever, and then you have an impact on your overall sales revenue. So people need to start thinking a little bit more in the bigger picture than just, well, we're going to automate that at some time. We're using intelligent call routing, because there is opportunity here.
Yeah, there is opportunity. And I love the bureau service idea. I think it makes a lot of sense. There's almost an acknowledgement by another human being that as a customer, you exist. And, Marianne, one of the things that we keep hearing about on this side of the pond, and I'm not sure if it's the same in the UK, but the number of people that are complaining that they're phoning businesses and just nobody is answering the telephone is just off the charts. This is really problematic. As a customer, and as a customer, you do have rights. I remember hearing last year, or maybe it was in 2021, something like only 1 out of 10 IRS telephone calls got answered. And that prompted President Biden to mandate that customer experience be part of the equation when it comes to frontline government services, which I think is certainly a step in the right direction. So finishing off our chat here, one of the things you touched on in your podcast that prompted this interview was the fact that you said businesses are going to have to start making some very tough decisions and having those difficult conversations. What are your thoughts about what some of those tough decisions are going to need to be in the near to medium term? And how do these transform? How do these evolve into long-term commercial CX strategies?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, because I think here is the crux of the matter. As long as companies see the customer service and the CX delivery as a pure cost, and they are not willing to invest into that area, until that changes, there will always be a massive, massive pain point. And especially when things get tough, these are typically the departments that are cut first, because there is no immediate solution. If anything, there is an immediate cost factor. But it's a bit of a short-term view. Because if you are not serving your customer from today, you do not have a sale tomorrow. If you are not rescuing your customer today, they will not come back. And they can tell others that you didn't answer their phone call, and therefore 10 others will also not come and buy from you, because they think, if I have a problem, they will not help me. That is human nature. People buy from people and firms they know will care for them if something goes wrong. If everything goes swimmingly, then happy days. But we all know it's not going swimmingly just now. So I tend to advise my customers to say, or my clients to say, hang on a second. See, is your budget really aligned with what you want to achieve in a year or in 2 years' time? And while we all agree we need marketing budget, and they are usually huge, I'm kind of going, give me a little bit more for my customer service budget, so that I can flex my workforce up and down, so that I maybe can use develop a chatbot application that takes the first pain out, or that I can go and find a bureau solution temporarily. I mean, in all fairness, it doesn't even have to be in my country, especially if it's English. You can go to Asia and you get English bureau support for, I don't know, 100 euro for the month or something like that. So I think there is opportunity and I would call it creative thinking today that helps you in a year or so.
Okay, well, that's a great note to end on, Marianne. Thank you very much for your candor as always. And if people want to find the podcast, the Operational Excellence Show, where can they go to download it?
They can obviously go to Apple. It's there. It's called the Operational Excellence Show. If people want to listen to that episode that Peter has been referring to, that's episode 131. It was published the end of January. But you can also find all the episodes on our website, rutzconsulting.com. Under the podcast header, you can pick whatever you want. There's also a search function there. And if you search where is customer service going wrong, it will just pop up.
Well, thank you very much for the time today, Marianne. We wish you a great rest of the week, and we look forward to seeing you very soon in person.
It was a pleasure to be with you, Peter. Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks for listening to the CX Files podcast. We really appreciate your feedback and suggestions. You can reach myself, Mark Hillary, or Peter Ryan via LinkedIn. Please also leave a rating or review on your favourite podcast provider, as that helps more people to find us. As always, we'd like to thank Chris Haig at Traction Media for the CX Files graphics. See you next week. And Marianne Rutz. And I'll clip that bit.